Written down centuries ago, the greatest story ever told. In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. A story about a beautiful and eternal creator, complete in himself, but so full of love that he made creatures to enjoy relationships with him. So God created human beings in his own image. This infinite being took eternity and wove it into tangible strands of earth. But his creation rebelled. Humans didn't think they needed him and tried to go their own way, disrupting the original design of joyful unity with their creator. In spite of everything, God has never stopped fighting for reunion and restoration. The wages of sin is death, but he knew the way to heal our fractured relationship. For this is how much God loved the world. He gave his one and only Son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. God sent his very best. He gave his Son, Jesus, to save the world from its sins. Now, his children, shameless and forgiven, free, loosened from the bonds of sin. The hero of all heroes, the greatest love story ever told.
Well, good morning. I was telling our team this week, I was like, we are so branded. We have 8s everywhere, and turquoise, and paint brushes. You know, our 8th day thing, it's really the same idea. It's another way of saying what the Bible and the New Testament says to us over and over again, that you are a new creation. You're people in the Messiah, in Christ, filled with the Spirit. You're a new humanity, like we talked about last week. You're an 8th day person, filled with resurrection power. It's just different ways of saying the same thing. And 8s are, I guess, trendy and cool. So that's how we've decided to express it, at least for now, is with 8th day people. But a couple weeks ago, I decided to pull up a TV show called The Walking Dead. Anybody ever watched The Walking Dead before? No, some of you. Well, I used to watch it a little bit, and I got to about season 3, and I stopped. And when I pulled it up the other day, they're on like season 10. And so I watched a little bit of an episode, and guess what? I had no idea what was going on. Can you believe that? And what I realized is that actually when we talk about being 8th day people, people filled with the Spirit, what you hear a lot about in church, you're actually jumping into about season 5 of the Bible. And we do that a lot, and I understand why, but I thought it might be helpful for us to just take some time and go season 1 through 5 for a while and get the overview. You know, almost 50% of young people from age 19, between age 19 and 30, if they grew up in church, 50% of them will leave between age 19 and age 30. And you know the main reason why? They have unanswered questions. They don't think science and faith can coexist. They don't understand how it works. Those are the 2 main reasons. Another statistic says that only 20% of sermons that you hear, and that's on the high end, only 20% will ever reference the Old Testament. And so I have just this random idea that it might be good for us to just kind of take the sweep of the whole thing. Look at it as a story, start some conversations about some new ideas and some new ways of looking at things. They're not really new. They're just being rediscovered. Of looking at the Scripture. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to begin to do the week after Mother's Day as we look at the storyline of the Bible. Taking it as the story is the only way to guard yourself, to make sure that you're taking it in context, make sure that you're understanding, and you're not falling into any kind of weird doctrines or false teaching. The only way to do that is to look at the story arc of the Bible. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm excited about it. Hope you guys will be as well. Like I said, that starts May 16th. Cool? All right, as Jen said, we're closing up our little mini-series on grace. I said this last week, but it goes together as a package. So if you missed the last 2 weeks, I encourage you hop onto our YouTube channel. You can catch those first couple messages. The first message was the gift, right? Grace is this lavish, extravagant gift given to us. Last week we talked about grace is God's ability. Grace isn't Tylenol. You remember that? It doesn't always make you feel better, but it makes you well, right? It's his ability to shape and form you into the image of God you're meant to be. And today we're talking about the relationship of grace. And I've got to be quick, so keep me on track, all right? We've got people who want to be baptized. So I need you all to listen really fast today, all right? So in Ephesians 2, as Jen just read, we see Paul talking about this relationship. And I think relationship's a pretty good word. But this relationship that Israel had that we were estranged from. But through the blood of Christ, we have entered into. When I was in school in Australia, I spent 1 year there. And I had my roommates. Some of you remember some of my roommates. I've told a story about them before. But after the first year, we exchanged roommates. There was a rule in school. Can you believe that? We lived in an apartment right near downtown Sydney, okay? My school didn't have dorms or anything, so we had an apartment. It was pretty cool. But there was a rule because they had the school. There was a rule because the school. It was cool. That you could only have 4 people in that apartment. Well, one day, I had a friend who was coming to school. And this friend did not get his stuff in order. And so he came to a foreign country and had no home. And so we decided that we would let him stay with us for a while. But we had an agreement. Him and I, we had an agreement. You can stay with us, but you cannot tell anybody, right? Because there's a rule at the cool school. You only have 4 people. Now we have 5. So you can stay here for free. You can sleep on the couch. But the deal is you can't tell anyone. One day we go to school. Me and my roommates, we usually sat together in class. At the end of class, we get called to come to the school office. We go into the office, and my friend, we'll call him Joseph, because that's his name. My friend's sitting there. Well, the higher-ups in the school had asked him where he'd been staying. And guess what he told them? He told them I'm staying at Matt's place. And so, I just had to talk to him and say, you don't have a place to stay anymore, right? The reason is we had a deal. We had an agreement. They're not going to let you stay here anyway. But just so you know, that deal is broken, right? Anybody ever had anything like that happen in your life? We had an agreement of how we're relating to each other. And either I messed it up or you messed it up, but that thing is broken. That's done, right? And I think pretty much every relationship we have in our life has some kind of boundary like that. You know, they're different between different people, but there is some sort of boundary, there's an agreement, there's a pact there. And this is what Paul's actually talking about when he says, you were alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, you were strangers to the, and he uses the word covenant. Now, I don't use covenant. I don't use that word when I'm just talking to people. It's not part of my everyday vocabulary. Anybody else use that word? So we're going to look at what does that mean? What's he talking about? And to do that, we have to flip all the way back to Genesis chapter 15. Now, the Hebrew word for covenant is berith. Can you say berith? Berith. You got to roll the R a little bit. It's a lot easier to say than the guttural sound we learned a few weeks ago. But berith. And berith means an agreement, a pact, an alliance, covenant. And to give you some background on this story, in Genesis 11, there's this event called the Tower of Babel. Anybody ever heard of that story? The Tower of Babel. And what happens at the Tower of Babel is mankind builds this tower, and to make a long story short, they say, or to make a short story shorter, I should say, they say, let us make a name for ourselves. Let us make a name for ourselves. And in Genesis 12, God says, well, God disperses them. He says, no, that's not going to happen. And then in Genesis 12, God says, I'm going to take someone who has no name. I'm going to take a no-name guy. And more than that, I'm going to take a guy who cannot continue his name because him and his wife are old and they can't have children. And I'm going to make a great nation from him. And that man's name is Abram. And so God comes to Abram. He says, leave your home, leave your family. I'm going to give you a child, and your name is going to continue on, and you're going to be a great nation, and through you, all nations of the world will be blessed. Not through the ones who want to make a name for themselves, but the one who has no name. And God still is doing that today. Do you know that? He's the God of the weak and the broken and the powerless, and those who have no name. That's who he works through. That's how his kingdom comes. So God promises Abram he will have children. A couple decades later is where we pick up in Genesis 15. So Abram's no longer in his 70s. He's probably in his mid-90s now. And it says this. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord, what will you give me, for I continue childless? Right? Remember, you promised me decades ago. I'm still childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus, a servant that was born in his home. And Abram said, Behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. Behold, the word of the Lord came to him. Listen, this man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, Look toward heaven, and number the stars, if you are able to number them. Then God said to him, So shall your offspring be. And Abram believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. Aren't you glad that's all it takes? God says something, you say, okay. God said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. But he said, O Lord, how am I to know that you shall possess it? The kid thing, I'm 90, okay. But God, how am I going to know that I'm going to possess this land? This is where the story gets weird, right? God, how am I to know it? What's God say? Bring me a heifer. Are you guys out there? God, how am I to know that your promise is going to be true? Bring me a cow. Is that how you would respond to someone? Okay, you're awake. But don't just bring me a cow. Make sure it's 3 years old. Bring me a female goat that's 3 years old. Bring me a ram that's 3 years old too. And I want a turtle dove and a young pigeon. Are you guys seeing the scene? Okay. So Abram brought him all these things, and he cut them in half. Some translations say he clove them in half. That means he got out his chainsaw. He cut these animals in half. And he laid each half over against the other. But he didn't cut the birds in half. And when the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, Abram drove them away. This is a weird story. Are you guys imagining this picture? All right, little baby cow comes. Little baby goat comes. Little baby ram comes. They're not going to have a good day. They're getting, boom, cut in half. Intestines, entrails everywhere. Let's drag them across. And we're going to drag this one across. And the birds are like, man, this is my lucky day. I'm not getting cut in half, right? And this is the picture. And the birds, and what kind of birds come when you got dead animals, right? Vultures, the birds of prey, they're going to come get some free meals because there's this stinky dead animals with their intestines strung out, blood everywhere, animals cut in half. PETA is going crazy. What's going on? What's happening? This is a really weird story. And this is one of those places where we have to step back into the biblical world a little bit. Because it's really clear what's going on to them. Even though to us it's like, this is super weird. There's not even any barbecue going on. This is a covenant ceremony. Every covenant in the ancient Near East has around 4 components to it. You have the terms and conditions, which we found in Genesis 12. You have the ceremony. You have the seal or the sign, which for the Israelites was circumcision. And then you have a test that tests the covenant. And so here we are in the covenant ceremony in this ancient Near Eastern world. And you don't have to do any history on the ancient Near East to find out what's going on. If you just turn to Jeremiah 34, verse 18, this is a story of a king in Israel whose name was Zedekiah. Zedekiah made a covenant. He made a covenant that he would release the slaves after a certain amount of time. But after that time passes, King Zedekiah decides, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to hold to a covenant that I made. And look what God says. He says, the men who transgressed my covenant and did not keep the terms of the covenant that they made before me, I will make them like the calf that they cut in two and pass between its parts. See, when you make a covenant in the ancient world, you take the animals and you split them in half. And you say your terms and conditions. You can stay in my apartment, but you can't tell anybody. And then you both agree and you walk through this aisle, this bloody aisle, the 2 halves of the animals. You walk around in a figure 8 pattern and you come back together. And what you're saying is, we are bound by this blood. And if one of us breaks this agreement, let us become like these animals, destroyed. It's a really serious thing you're entering into. It speaks of the severity of the relationship. And this would really happen. 2 kings come together. They say, I'll give you olive oil if you give me cedar wood. And they cut the animals and they walk through it. If one of them decided they weren't going to do that, guess what? They're getting attacked. They're going to war. They're going to become like those cows that were split in half. So this is what is going on. The stakes are extremely high. Notice what happens next in Genesis 15:12. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram. Oh no. Abram's getting up there in age, right? So you have this extremely serious agreement you're about to step into with God, nonetheless, right? And Abraham's just passes out. Are you seeing the picture now? Okay. And behold, a dreadful darkness fell upon him. And the Lord said to Abram, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. And for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age. He's already at a pretty good old age, but... And they shall come back here in the fourth generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. When the sun had gone down, and it was dark, behold, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. Abram is asleep. And this smoking firepot that represents the presence of the Lord walks down between the pieces alone. See, God knows that Abram cannot and will not be faithful to the covenant. He knows his family will not be faithful to the covenant. So God doesn't require Abraham to walk through. He walks through. And in doing that, what he's saying is, I will be faithful to my half. If I'm not, let what happened to these cows happen to me. But I will also shoulder the consequences of you not being faithful. Because I know you're not going to be faithful. And so I'm going to make this covenant of grace. Grace is extended to you. You can't mess this agreement up because it's not on you. You didn't pass between the pieces. Only God did. When people made a covenant, they would exchange their outer garments. They'd take their coat off, and they would give it to each other. And that would symbolize their exchanging authority. I'm giving you my authority. They would exchange their belts, not the kind that hold your pants up, the kind that have their weapons on them. They'd say, I'm going to fight for you, and you're going to fight for me. And they would exchange names. Use your imagination for a second. Pretend that Damon, because you're sitting right in front of me, I'm going to use you as an example. Damon and I are kings. Can you believe that? And Damon and I, these two kings, we come and we make a covenant. We're going to walk through the pieces of the animal together. After that moment, I am known as Matt Damon. It's a pretty good name. And he's known as Damon Matt. But Matt Damon's a better name, right? I couldn't have planned that any better. But what that means is that when I go and I meet someone, and they say, what's your name? I say, I'm Matt Damon. They know that Damon and his family, everyone connected to him, has my back. His tribe is for me, and my tribe is for him, because we share a name. And you notice that God makes this covenant with Abram, and he's going to reinstitute it with his son Jacob, and with Abram's grandson Isaac, and God becomes known from that point not simply as God, but the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They've exchanged names. And many, many scholars believe that Abram's name is going to shortly be changed to Abraham. They believe the ah that is added is Abraham taking the ah from Yahweh into his name. And so what's that mean for you and for me? Well, one of the most profound things about this is that when God enters a covenant with Abram, he is bound to do what he asks Abram to do. If I ask Damon, and we're in a covenant, give me a gallon of milk, I'm bound to return that to him. And in just a few chapters, God is going to ask that Abram sacrifice his son, Isaac. And God doesn't actually require that from him because he sees that he has enough faith to go through with it. But what Abraham doesn't realize in that moment is that when God's asking him to give his son, God is binding himself to give his son in the region of Moriah, where Abraham's son was to be sacrificed on Mount Moriah. And so we fast forward to Jesus, and Jesus is going around, he's announcing God's kingdom. He's reshaping human families that include all nations, not just Israel. And he boils God's covenant expectation into what he calls the Great Command. Have you heard it? Love God, love people. Here's your covenant terms. But Jesus knows what we all know, that his disciples will not be faithful to that covenant all the time. You and I, we will fail to love God and love people. His disciples that are with him, Peter, they will fail to love God and love people. And in Luke 22:19, look what he says. He says, he took the bread, and when he gave thanks, he broke it in half. And he said, this is my body given for you. He broke the body in half. And likewise, he took the cup and said, this cup that is poured out for you is the new what? Covenant in my blood. So what Jesus is saying is my body is going to be broken, my blood's going to be spilled. In essence, I'm going to walk down this aisle of crucifixion so that you don't have to. Hello. He says, I'm going to give you my authority. I'm going to be on your side. I'm going to give you my name. We're in covenant now. But you can't mess it up. You can reject the relationship. You can say you don't want any part of the covenant. But once you're in it, it's not on you because you didn't walk down the aisle. You can move towards faithfulness, but all the while knowing that God has already anticipated and built into the agreement that you will fail, that you won't love people and you won't love God as he loves them. But that doesn't break your covenant because Jesus went through on his own. So 2 things for you. So number 1, don't be afraid. You don't need to be afraid. Sometimes we feel insecure, we feel unworthy, or we feel unable to be in relationship with God. But God says to Abram, don't be afraid. In Luke chapter 5, Jesus comes to the disciples who are fishing. And you know the story. He says, cast the nets on the other side, and they bring up all these fish, right? They'd been fishing all night and caught nothing. Jesus says, go to the other side. They catch all these fish. And what's Peter say? He comes before the Lord, right? He says, I'm a sinful man. And Jesus says to him, don't be afraid. You don't need to be afraid of relationship with God because it's not on you. You don't need to feel insecure about it because it's not on you. He's passed through the bloody aisle. So you can move towards faithfulness and the power of the Spirit, loving God and loving others. And you can know that at some point you will fail, and God knows that you will fail. But what I want you to know today is that apparently that doesn't deter God from being in relationship with you. And even more than that, that doesn't deter him from working and partnering with you in your life. Are you out there? And the second thing, I would ask you a question before we get into these baptisms, is where are you putting your confidence at? Where are you putting your confidence? Because you have God standing before you. And I hope what you've picked up today is God standing there saying, I'm giving you my authority. I'm on your side. I'm giving you my name. You can't mess this up. But so many of us, we're still putting our confidence in our performance, putting it in our discipline. I'm going to wake up. I'm going to read my Bible 30 minutes the next day. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to work harder. I'm going to get ahead in life. Where's your confidence at? Somebody in here, or maybe you know somebody who's thinking this, or maybe this is you. But I've heard many people say, I gave up on God because somebody in the church let me down. Well, let me ask you a question. And if it's somebody you know, you can tell them, Matt wants me to ask you this question. Your relationship with God is so valuable. It's so precious. This covenant that he lays before you. It's so valuable. Why are you putting your confidence in God based on how other people treat you? Hello. Why are you putting your confidence in how other people treat you? People are always going to let you down. They will always let you down. Even if they have good intentions, they lack the ability to follow through. Why are you putting your confidence in other people and what they think and what they say? Haven't you spent enough time trying to trust in other people to fulfill your needs? While God is standing there saying, here's my authority. I'm for you. Here's my name. Put your confidence in that. Where's your confidence at? Where'd you put it? So if I can quickly summarize these 3 things we've learned about grace over the past few weeks for you. Number 1 is that you are radically, scandalously, recklessly loved, and you're always accepted and welcome home, and you can't get yourself dirty enough or messed up enough to escape the love and grace of God. Amen. That's what we learned week 1. Week 2, at the same time, God's grace is his ability to shape and mold you into a new type of human. And we have access to that ability through our faith. God says, I'm making you new. You just say, okay. Okay. I may not always walk that out, but I have access to his ability. This thing called grace. It's actually changing me from the inside out. number 3, all the while, I'm secure in this relationship. It's really not contingent on me. Like I said, I can reject it. I can say I don't want to be in it. But once I'm in it, God's the only one who walked through. And so I can't mess up enough to break the agreement that we have. You can't mess up enough to break the covenant that you have. The relationship that you have. I hope what you've seen today is it's not just, yeah, I know God, right? We're cool. I've met him before. No. You're in covenant with him because of what he did. If you're here today or you're watching online and you want to step into that covenant with God, the Bible says you just need to confess it with your mouth and believe it in your heart that Jesus made a way and Jesus is the way. And you will be brought back into that relationship with God that you were once estranged from, but now you're welcome into by the broken body and the blood of Jesus. And maybe you're here today and you've done that a while ago. Well, we have some people here who are about to get baptized. Yeah. Well, I want to tell you, if you have stepped back into relationship with God and you haven't yet, you need to be baptized. Because if you're not baptized, that's like I'm standing up at the wedding ceremony, getting ready to marry my wife. I say the vows, I say the words, but then when the ring comes out, I say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's not get crazy, right? I don't want anybody to know that I'm having this covenant, this agreement with her, right? How crazy would that be? That's what baptism is. It's like I'm saying to everybody, yeah, I have an alliance. I have an agreement. I have a covenant with God. So if you haven't yet, you can sign up online to get baptized, and we would love to do that for you. Let's all stand.